Billionaire mocked the maid with a $100 million bet, but her daughter was about to change everything. In the heart of Silicon Valley, behind the glass walls of a billion-dollar lab, the future of energy was slipping away. The Prometheus engine, a machine designed to power entire cities, couldn't run for more than 90 seconds. Harrison Thorne, the billionaire behind it all, was running out of patience. First, he lashed out at his team of world-class engineers. 20 million and overtime, he snapped. And you geniuses have nothing. His engineers stood silent. Then with a smirk, he turned on the maid cleaning the floor. In front of everyone, he mocked her, daring her to fix the impossible machine for $100 million. Maybe the maid has the answer. Fix it, and I'll give you $100 million. She stood frozen, humiliated. And just as the laughter began to ripple through the room, a small, steady voice cut the air. My mommy can't, but I can. The machine was telling a secret, but only the little girl could hear it. Its heart was a tangle of wires and silent steel, a puzzle that had defeated the world's smartest minds. To them, it was a failure. To her, it was just sad. The Prometheus engine was supposed to be Harrison Thorne's masterpiece. It sat on a pedestal in the center of the Thorne Industries Innovation Lab, a place that felt more like a cathedral than a workshop. Sunlight streamed through 40-foot windows, glinting off the engine's polished chrome surface. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and failure. For 6 agonizing weeks, this engine had been the sole focus of the brightest engineers money could buy. It was more than a machine. It was a promise of clean, limitless energy, a device that could power entire cities and make Thorne Industries the most important company on Earth. It was also a $2 billion paperweight. Harrison Thorne, a man whose tailored suits cost more than the cars his employees drove, paced the gleaming white floor. At 55, he had the sharp eyes of a hawk and a temper that could curdle milk. He had built an empire from nothing. He had crushed competitors, bent markets to his will, and graced the covers of magazines that celebrated his genius. But he could not make this engine run for more than 90 seconds. After that precise amount of time, it would shudder, whine, and die with a final pathetic click. Every test produced the same result. Every diagnostic returned the same infuriating error message: cascade resonance failure. His lead engineers, a team of men and women with degrees from the best schools in the country, stood in a tight, nervous semicircle. Their faces were pale with exhaustion. They hadn't had a decent night's sleep in over a month. They had tried everything. They rewrote millions of lines of code. They replaced every circuit board, every sensor, every single wire. They even flew in a physicist from Switzerland who specialized in quantum mechanics. Nothing worked. The 90-second curse held fast. Another failure. Dr. Miles. Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet. It was always quietest before the storm. Dr. Alan Miles, a man with a PhD from Caltech and a mortgage the size of a small country's debt, swallowed hard. Sir, the resonance. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. It builds exponentially. The feedback loop is instantaneous. We simply can't find the source. Harrison stopped pacing and turned to face him. He gestured at the silent engine with a flick of his wrist. So, what you're telling me after 6 weeks and $20 million in overtime is that you don't have a clue. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. The engineers flinched. They were used to solving problems, to bending the laws of physics to their will. This silent machine was a monument to their collective failure, and Harrison Thorne did not tolerate failure. We are pursuing new avenues, Doctor. Miles began, but Harrison cut him off. New avenues? Are you going to consult a psychic next? Maybe we should sacrifice a goat to the gods of engineering. His voice rose, echoing in the vast, silent lab. This engine is the key to the Apex project. Our partnership with the Department of Defense hangs on this. I have generals and senators calling me every single day, and I have to tell them that my team of geniuses has been defeated by a fancy toaster. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled silver hair, his composure finally cracking. His gaze swept the room, landing on a figure in the corner, almost hidden behind a bank of silent supercomputers. It was a woman in a simple blue uniform, quietly, methodically wiping down the stainless steel surfaces. She moved with a practiced invisibility, trying her best to seem like a part of the furniture. Her name was Amelia Hayes. For 2 years, she had cleaned the laboratories at Thorne Industries. She was a ghost in this world of titans, emptying their trash cans, mopping up their coffee spills, and listening to their hushed, frantic conversations about things she didn't understand. She was a single mother. Her world was not one of billion-dollar engines and government contracts. It was a world of mounting medical bills, of copays and deductibles, of a relentless illness that was slowly draining her savings and her strength. The chemotherapy treatments were harsh, and the debt they created was even harsher. She took this extra cleaning shift for the overtime pay, money she desperately needed for the next round of treatment. Harrison's frustration, finding no purchase on his brilliant but useless engineers, needed a new target. His eyes narrowed on the cleaning lady. A cruel, ugly idea began to form in his mind. He wanted to humiliate his team to show them how little their expensive educations mattered in the face of this problem. "You there?" he barked, pointing a finger at Amelia. "What's your name?" Amelia froze, her hand hovering over the surface she was cleaning. Every head in the room turned towards her. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, and her cheeks burned with a sudden hot shame. "Amelia, sir. Amelia Hayes." Harrison walked slowly towards her, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the floor. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to look up at him. "Amelia, tell me, Amelia, what do you think of our little problem here?" She was confused. "Sir, the engine, Amelia, our $2 billion headache. You've been in here every night. You've heard these geniuses talk in circles. Surely you must have an opinion." He was mocking her, using her as a tool to shame his team. The engineers shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak. Amelia's mind raced. She just wanted to finish her work and go home to her daughter. I wouldn't know anything about that, sir. I just clean." "Of course you do," Harrison said with a cold smile. "But let's pretend for a moment. Let's pretend you're not just a maid. Let's pretend you have the answer." He turned to his engineers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe we've been overthinking it. Maybe we don't need PhDs. Maybe all we need is a fresh perspective. What do you say, Dr. Miles? Should we let the cleaning lady have a try?" Dr. Miles looked at the floor, his face grim. A few of the younger engineers snickered nervously. The humiliation was thick in the air. Amelia felt small, exposed, and utterly powerless. She wished the floor would swallow her whole. "That's a ridiculous idea, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. Harrison's smile widened. He was enjoying this. "Is it? I'll tell you what's ridiculous. Spending $20 million to find out nothing. At least your idea would be cheaper." He took another step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper that everyone could still hear. "I'll make you a deal, Amelia. You're a simple woman. You probably have simple problems. A mortgage, car payments. I bet a little money would go a long way for you." He straightened up, his voice booming through the lab once more. "Here is my offer. In front of all these witnesses, you fix this engine, and I will give you $100 million. A collective gasp went through the room. The engineers stared in disbelief. It was a joke, of course, a cruel, insane, theatrical joke. The number was so absurd, so impossible that it was meant only to underscore her powerlessness. "Fix my engine, Amelia," Harrison repeated, savoring the moment. "And $100 million is yours. If you can't, you're fired. Not just from this lab, but from the entire company. And I'll make sure every cleaning service in this city knows you're the woman who thought she could play engineer." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. She felt the crushing weight of her medical debt, the fear of losing her job, the shame of this public spectacle. She couldn't speak. She could only stand there, trapped in the billionaire's cruel game. I can't," she stammered. "Of course you can't," Harrison said with a dismissive wave. "Now get back to your work. At least you're good at that." He turned his back on her, ready to unleash a new wave of fury upon his team. The show was over. The point had been made, but then a small, quiet voice cut through the tension. "My mommy can't, but I can." Every head swiveled towards the entrance of the lab. Standing in the doorway was a little girl, She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. She had long blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail and was wearing a worn pink jacket over a faded t-shirt. In her arms, she clutched a well-loved, slightly ragged teddy bear. She had been waiting quietly by the door for her mother to finish her shift. It was Chloe Hayes, Amelia's daughter. She looked directly at Harrison Thorne, her blue eyes clear and steady. There was no fear in them. There was only a quiet, unshakable certainty. The engineers stared, mouth agape. Harrison Thorne turned around slowly, a look of pure astonishment on his face. For a moment, the entire $2 billion laboratory was utterly silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the ventilation system. Harrison stared at the child, then at Amelia, and then back at the child. Then he did something that shattered the tension. He threw his head back and laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was a loud, booming, derisive sound that bounced off the high ceilings. "Well, this gets better and better," he roared, wiping a tear from his eye. "First the maid, now her child. What is this, a comedy show? Tell me, little girl, are you going to fix it with a magic wand?" Chloe took a step forward, undaunted by his laughter. Her little face was serious. "No, sir," she said, her voice small but clear. "I'm going to listen to it." The laughter died in Harrison's throat. He looked at the girl's earnest face, at her mother's terrified expression, and at the stunned faces of his engineering team. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming, but his arrogance was a fire that needed fuel. And this was the most bizarre fuel he had ever been offered. His cruel smile returned. "You know what?" he said, walking towards Chloe. "I accept. The offer stands. Your mother was too scared to take the challenge. But you've got courage. I'll give you that." Amelia rushed forward, grabbing Chloe's arm. "No, Chloe, stop it. This is not a game. Please, sir. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying." Harrison held up a hand, silencing her. "It's too late for that. Amelia, your daughter has accepted the terms. $100 million if she succeeds. You both lose your jobs if she fails." He reveled in the impossible drama of it all. He imagined the story he would tell his friends on the board. "Clear the area," he commanded his engineers. "Give the little genius some room to work. Let's see what she can do." The engineers, looking utterly bewildered, backed away from the pedestal. They looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of pity for the family and disbelief at their boss's madness. But one person in the room wasn't laughing. Near the back, leaning against a console, was a woman who had remained silent through the entire ordeal. Dr. Evelyn Reed was not a Thorne Industries employee. She was an observer from a government oversight committee, a physicist with a reputation for being meticulous, impartial, and impossible to fool. She was in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen everything from top-secret military projects to catastrophic corporate failures. She had seen hubris destroy brilliant men before. She watched as Chloe, holding her mother's hand, approached the massive, silent engine. She saw the girl's calm focus, the way her eyes scanned the machine, not with a child's idle curiosity, but with a strange analytical intensity. There was something in the girl's posture that made Dr. Reed push herself off the wall and take a step forward. "Mr. Thorne, Doctor," Reed said, her voice cutting through the whispers in the room. "If this ridiculous test is to proceed, I will serve as the official adjudicator. I will document the girl's methods and her results. This will not be a circus. It will be an experiment." Harrison, caught up in his own theatrics, waved a hand dismissively. "Fine, fine. Document all you want. Get the cameras rolling. Put it on the company's internal feed. Let everyone in this building see what true innovation looks like." He was certain of the outcome. In an hour, the girl would have failed. He would have fired her mother, and he would have an unforgettable story to tell about the time a 10-year-old girl tried to fix his $2 billion engine. He would be a legend. Amelia was trembling, her face ashen. "Chloe, baby, please," she whispered desperately. "Let's just go home. We don't have to do this." Chloe gently let go of her mother's hand. She turned to her with a look of profound love and determination. "It's okay, Mommy," she said softly. "Grandpa Eli taught me how," he said. You just have to be quiet and listen to the metal. It always tells you where it hurts. She then turned to the Prometheus engine. It loomed over her like a steel giant. To everyone else, it was a complex marvel of modern science. To Chloe, it was just like the old engines in her great-grandfather's shed, bigger, shinier, but still a machine with a story to tell. She walked right up to the cold, silent metal. She placed her small hands flat against its surface, closed her eyes, and did the one thing no one else in that room had thought to do. She listened, and in the deep metallic silence, the engine began to tell her its secret. The first thing Chloe learned from her great-grandfather was that silence had a sound. Sergeant Elias Eli Vance was a man forged in the crucible of World War II. He wasn't a soldier who carried a rifle. He was a master mechanic who kept the B-17 bombers flying over hostile skies. He was a legend in the 8th Air Force, a man they said could diagnose a failing engine from 100 yards away just by the change in its hum. He had a gift, a deep intuitive connection to machines that bordered on the mystical. After the war, he came home not with medals for bravery, but with hands permanently stained by oil and a quiet understanding of metal fatigue. He filled his small workshop behind his house with the tired, broken hearts of engines from tractors, cars, and old farm equipment. And it was in that dusty, sun-drenched space that he taught his great-granddaughter Chloe his secrets. Most folks think an engine is just a bunch of parts, he told her, his voice a low, growly rumble as he guided her small hand over the engine block of a 1,950 seconds pickup truck. They're wrong. An engine's got a life. It's got a rhythm, a heartbeat. And when it gets sick, its heartbeat changes. You can't find that change on a computer screen. You have to feel it right here. He'd press her hand against the vibrating metal. You have to listen with your skin. Chloe, even at 6 or 7 years old, understood. While other children played with dolls, she learned the language of machines. She learned that a high-pitched whine could mean a bearing was about to fail. A low guttural knock could mean a problem with the pistons. She learned that every machine when under stress gives off a warning. A tiny vibration, a subtle shift in temperature. A sound so faint it was more a feeling than a noise. The trick, Eli always said, was to catch the whisper before it became a scream. Now standing in the sterile, futuristic lab, Chloe closed her eyes and let the world fall away. The hushed whispers of the engineers, the hum of the lights, Harrison Thorne's impatient tapping foot, it all faded into a distant buzz. She focused only on the machine beneath her palms. She wasn't thinking about the $100 million. She was thinking about her mother's tired face, the worry in her eyes that never seemed to leave. She was thinking about the pile of brown envelopes on their kitchen table, the ones her mother tried to hide from her. She was thinking about her promise to Grandpa Eli made just before he passed away that she would always use his gift to fix things that were broken. "Okay," she said, her voice startlingly clear in the quiet room. She opened her eyes and looked at Dr. Miles. "Can you please turn it on? But only for a few seconds?" Dr. Miles looked at Harrison, who gave a sharp, impatient nod. The engineer walked to a control panel, his fingers hovering over the activation sequence. He felt like a fool. The entire situation was a waking nightmare. He pressed the button. The Prometheus engine spooled to life. Allo quickly escalated into a powerful roaring crescendo. The sound was immense, a demonstration of the raw power trapped within the machine. To the engineers, it was the familiar sound of impending failure. They tensed, waiting for the 90-second mark. But Chloe wasn't listening to the roar. She was listening to what was underneath the roar. Her hands were still pressed against the casing. She tilted her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. She felt it instantly, a shiver, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through the engine's metal skin. It was out of sync with the main vibration of the engine. It was a rogue wave in a calm sea, a discordant note in a beautiful chord. "Turn it off," she said suddenly. Dr. Miles complied. The engine spun down, its roar fading back into silence. The engineers exchanged confused looks. She hadn't even let it run for 10 seconds. "What was that?" Harrison demanded, his patience wearing thin. "Did you have a sudden revelation? Did the engine whisper the secrets of the universe to you?" Chloe ignored him. She turned to Dr. Reed, the one person in the room whose eyes held not mockery, but genuine curiosity. There's a second vibration, Chloe said. It's very small, and it's not in the right rhythm. Dr. Reed walked over, her expression thoughtful, a harmonic dissonance. Dr. Miles, your sensor should have picked that up. Dr. Miles shook his head, gesturing to a massive monitor displaying thousands of data points. Impossible. Our vibrational sensors are the most sensitive in the world. They can detect the footsteps of an ant. You can see the data right there. The primary harmonic is stable until the 80-second mark, then it cascades. There is no second vibration. Your sensors are listening for an earthquake, Chloe said simply. They're missing the whisper. She walked around the engine, her small hand trailing lightly along its surface. She was like a doctor searching for a source of pain. She stopped near the base where a series of thick silver cables fed power into the core. It's coming from in here. Down deep, the engineers looked at each other again. That was the primary coolant assembly. It was a sealed unit, triple shielded. Nothing could go wrong in there. They had run a dozen simulations on that specific component. It was perfect. Can you turn it on again? Chloe asked. But this time, I need everyone to be completely quiet. Harrison sighed dramatically, but gestured for Dr. Miles to proceed. Once again, the engine roared to life. This time, Chloe wasn't touching it. She stood a few feet away, her eyes closed again, her head tilted. She was using her ears now, just as Eli had taught her. He used to make her stand across the workshop and identify which tool he had dropped on the concrete floor just by its sound. A wrench sounded different from a screwdriver. A socket sounded different from a bolt. He trained her ears to hear the subtle details everyone else missed. The roar filled the room, but Chloe's mind filtered it out. She was listening for the ghost in the machine, and then she heard it, a tiny high-pitched ping. It happened just as the engine reached peak power. It was almost completely masked by the overwhelming noise. But it was there, a sound as small and sharp as a needle. There, she exclaimed, her eyes snapping open. It did it again. Did you hear it? The engineers shook their heads. They had heard nothing but the deafening roar. Harrison rolled his eyes. Kid, I don't have time for these games. You're hearing things. But Dr. Reed was staring at a secondary monitor, one that displayed the raw audio input from the lab's acoustic sensors. Wait a minute, she said, walking towards the screen and peering at it closely. Mr. Thorne, she's not hearing things. She pointed to a tiny spike on the audio waveform graph. A spike so small, it was almost invisible against the mountain range of the engine's primary noise. There is an anomalous acoustic event at the 4.7-second mark, a high-frequency spike lasting less than 1/10 of a second. The diagnostic software would have dismissed it as background noise, a statistical error, but it's there. The lab fell silent again. This time, the silence was different. It was laced with a thread of stunned disbelief. A 10-year-old girl, with her ears alone, had identified a data point that their multi-million-dollar software had ignored. Harrison Thorne stared at the tiny spike on the screen, and for the first time that day, his cruel smile vanished. He looked at Chloe, not as a maid's daughter, but as an impossible variable in an equation he thought he controlled. Chloe, however, was already moving on. The sound had told her the what. Now she needed to find the why. She remembered another one of Eli's lessons. Metal has a memory, kiddo. Every time it gets too hot or too cold, every time it gets hit, it remembers. And sometimes those memories create a weakness you can't see. It's not a software problem, Chloe announced to the room. And it's not a design problem. The part is wrong. Dr. Miles stepped forward. His professional pride stung. That's impossible, young lady. Every component in this engine was custom-milled in Germany. It was X-rayed, stress-tested, and certified. The material tolerances are perfect to within a nanometer. Is the engine made of a new metal? Chloe asked, looking at Dr. Miles. He was taken aback by the question. Well, yes. It's a proprietary alloy, a tungsten-cobalt composite. It's designed to handle incredible heat and stress. Chloe nodded slowly, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Grandpa Eli worked on airplanes. He said that when they started using new metals, the planes would get sick in new ways. He said, "You can't treat a new sickness with an old medicine." She turned and pointed to the spot on the engine where she had felt the vibration. The ping and the shiver are coming from the same place. It's a tiny crack. It's so small you can't see it. But when the engine runs, the metal gets hot and the crack gets a little bigger and it starts to sing. A crack. The idea was absurd. A microscopic flaw in the world's most advanced, most carefully manufactured engine component. "Prove it," Harrison said, his voice a low growl. The challenge was no longer a joke. It was real. Chloe looked around the lab. Her eyes scanned the tools and diagnostic equipment scattered on the workbenches. Then she saw it. Tucked away in a corner was a simple old-fashioned mechanic stethoscope, the kind a garage mechanic might use to listen for engine knocks. It was an antique in this high-tech world, probably used for a demonstration or brought in by an older engineer. "I need that," she said, pointing. An assistant, looking completely bewildered, fetched the stethoscope and handed it to her. Chloe put the earpieces in her ears. She looked like a child playing doctor, the instrument comically large on her. She approached the engine and placed the cold metal bell of the stethoscope against the casing, right on the spot where she'd felt the tremor. "Turn it on," she said, her voice muffled, "and leave it on." Dr. Miles hesitated, looking at Harrison, who gave a sharp nod. The engine roared to life for the third time. The engineers began to count down from 90 seconds in their heads. Chloe closed her eyes, her entire world shrinking to the sounds coming through the stethoscope. She heard the thunderous, healthy beat of the engine's core. But underneath it, she heard the whisper. The tiny ping was now a clear, sharp tick, tick, tick. It was the sound of a tiny fissure, a microscopic flaw in the alloy, vibrating under immense stress. It was the engine's secret cry for help. She followed the sound, moving the stethoscope an inch at a time. It grew louder, clearer. She was tracing the crack by its voice. 40 seconds, an engineer muttered. The ticking was getting faster. The stress was building. The cascade was beginning. 60 seconds. Chloe didn't waver. Her concentration was absolute. She had found the precise source. It was a single mounting bolt for the coolant assembly. The bolt itself wasn't cracked. The crack was in the engine block underneath the bolt head, hidden from sight. The bolt was acting like a tuning fork, amplifying the vibration and transmitting the sound. 80 seconds, the whole engine began to shudder. The familiar catastrophic whine started to build. The cascade resonance was taking over. "It's going to shut down," Dr. Miles yelled. "Here," Chloe shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. She pulled the stethoscope away and pressed her finger firmly on the head of the bolt. "The problem is right here." At 90 seconds, just as the whine reached its peak, the engine died with its usual final click. But this time, everyone in the room knew what had happened. They hadn't just watched another failure. They had watched a diagnosis. "Doctor." Reed walked over and knelt beside Chloe. "Are you certain, child?" she asked gently. Chloe nodded, her face flushed with concentration. "The metal is tired. It's a memory crack from when the bolt was tightened. The new alloy is strong, but it's brittle, like hard candy. You tightened the bolt too much, and it made a tiny crack. The computer can't see it, but the engine can feel it." Harrison Thorne stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The maid's daughter hadn't just offered a wild guess. She had provided a specific mechanical diagnosis, a diagnosis that was either the rambling of a child or the most brilliant piece of intuitive engineering he had ever witnessed. There was only one way to find out. "Get your tools," he commanded Dr. Miles, his voice hoarse. "Take that bolt out. We're going to see if this little girl is a genius or a liar." "Doctor." For Miles, his face a mixture of skepticism and a dawning, terrifying respect, personally retrieved a high-torque wrench from a pristine foam-lined drawer. The tool looked like a futuristic weapon. He approached the engine, his movements slow and deliberate. Two other engineers flanked him, one holding a powerful fiber optic camera, the other a set of magnetic trays to hold the components. "Are you sure about this, sir?" Dr. Miles asked Harrison one last time, his voice low. "If we disassemble the coolant housing, we void the manufacturer's warranty on the core assembly. The Germans will charge us a fortune to re-certify it." Harrison Thorne did not look at Dr. Miles. His gaze was fixed on Chloe, who stood quietly beside her mother, her small hand now clutching Amelia's. The billionaire's mind was reeling. $100 million. The number which he had thrown out as a joke now echoed in his head with the weight of a binding contract. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the impossibility of it all. If this child was right, then everything he understood about expertise, about credentials, about the very nature of genius was wrong. And if she was wrong, he could dismiss this whole bizarre episode as a fluke and get back to his predictable world of problems that money and degrees could solve. He needed to know. "Do it," Harrison commanded, his voice a rasp. "Void the warranty." "I don't care. I want to see what's under that bolt." Dr. Miles nodded grimly. He positioned the wrench, the alloy steel clicking precisely onto the head of the bolt. With a grunt, he applied pressure. The bolt tightened to a specific and immense torque, resisted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack that made everyone jump, the seal broke. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Slowly, carefully, Dr. Miles began to turn the wrench. The engineers leaned in closer, their faces illuminated by the bright white light of the inspection lamps. The bolt was long, nearly 8 inches of finely threaded steel. Each turn felt deliberate, ceremonial. Amelia held her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified for her daughter. She had seen what men like Harrison Thorne did to people who embarrassed them. This wasn't about an engine anymore. It was about pride. Finally, the last thread disengaged. With the delicate touch of a surgeon, Dr. Miles lifted the bolt from its housing. It looked perfect, gleaming, flawless, a testament to German engineering. He placed it carefully on the magnetic tray. "Now, the camera," he ordered. An engineer maneuvered the slim, flexible neck of the fiber optic camera into the empty bolt hole. On a large monitor nearby, a grainy magnified image appeared. The engineers all leaned in, their eyes scanning the screen. The image showed the smooth circular walls of the threaded hole. It was a perfect piece of machinery. There was nothing there. Dr. Miles looked up, a wave of relief washing over his face. He was about to declare it clean, to pronounce the child's theory of fantasy. "There's nothing here, sir," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "The housing is pristine, as we expected." Harrison felt a surge of victory. It was all a lucky guess, a child's fantasy. The world made sense again. "So, it was just a story after all," he said, turning a cold gaze on Chloe and Amelia. But Dr. Reed stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp. "Look at the base." Pan the camera down to the very bottom of the housing. The engineer adjusted the camera. The image on the screen shifted, moving past the threads to the flat circular surface where the end of the bolt would have rested. And then they saw it. It was almost invisible, a line so fine it looked like a stray piece of hair, a microscopic scratch on the polished alloy. It started at the edge of the hole and ran outward for less than a millimeter before disappearing. It was nothing, a cosmetic flaw, an insignificant imperfection. "That's it," one of the younger engineers scoffed. "That's the catastrophic flaw. It's a tooling mark." Chloe shook her head. She had never seen the inside of the engine, but she knew what was there. "It's not a scratch," she said, her voice unwavering. "A scratch has sides. That line doesn't. It goes in." Dr. Reed pointed at the screen. "She's right," she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. Increased the magnification and switched to the thermal imaging filter. The engineer typed a command. The image on the screen zoomed in, the gray metallic landscape growing until the tiny line became a jagged canyon. He then activated the thermal filter. The screen flickered and the image was replaced by a swirling map of blues and greens, representing the ambient temperature of the metal. But the line, the tiny crack, glowed with a faint ghostly red light. "My God," Dr. Miles whispered, his voice trembling. "Doctor," Reed explained to the stunned room, "residual heat. The stress of the cascade resonance day after day has focused all of its thermal energy right on that single point. The crack is a heat sink. It's holding on to the memory of the engine's fever." It was undeniable. It was impossible. It was the truth. A microscopic, invisible fissure hidden deep inside the engine's core was the source of the $2 billion failure. A flaw so small that no sensor could detect it. No diagnostic could find it, but a 10-year-old girl with no tools, no training, and no blueprints had found it just by listening. Harrison Thorne stared at the glowing red line on the screen. He felt a cold sensation creep up his spine. The room was silent, but his mind was roaring. The world had just tilted on its axis. He looked from the screen to the little girl. She stood there, not with a look of triumph, but with a quiet sadness, as if she were looking at something that was in pain. He had publicly in front of his entire senior engineering team, and a government official offered this child $100 million. It was a contract made of mockery and arrogance, but it was a contract nonetheless. The terms were simple: fix the engine. She hadn't fixed it yet, but she had done something even more remarkable. She had found the wound. So, he began, his voice barely a whisper. How do we fix it? All eyes turned to Chloe. The world's greatest engineers, men and women, who commanded six-figure salaries, were looking to a child for the answer. Chloe thought for a moment. She pictured her great-grandfather's workshop. She remembered what he did when he found a crack in an old engine block. The solution wasn't always to replace the part. Sometimes Eli had taught her the cure wasn't about making something new. It was about helping the old part heal. You can't just put a new bolt in. She said the metal around the crack is weak now. It's tired. If you put the same pressure on it, it will just crack again, and the next time it will be worse. She looked at Dr. Miles. Do you have something like a sleeve? A very thin metal tube that can fit inside the hole. Dr. Miles nodded slowly. His mind beginning to work again to follow her logic? A cylinder bushing? Yes. We could fabricate one in the machine shop. It would distribute the pressure from the bolt more evenly across the surface. It needs to be made of a different metal, though, Chloe added. Something softer. Something that will give a little, like a cushion. She looked around the lab, her eyes scanning the materials on the shelves, like copper. Copper. The engineers stared at her. Copper was an excellent conductor of heat and electricity, but it was a soft metal. No one would ever think to use a soft metal as a load-bearing component in a high-performance engine core. It went against every rule in their textbooks. That's unconventional, Dr. Miles stammered. The pressure specifications for that bolt are enormous. Copper would deform. Yes, Chloe said patiently. That's the point. It needs to deform just a little. It will press into the crack and hold it together like a bandage, and it will absorb the little shiver before it can grow into a shake. She was reciting a lesson from Eli as if he were standing right beside her. Sometimes the strongest patch is the softest one, kiddo. Dr. Reed was looking at Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. The child was not just guessing. She was describing a principle of mechanical engineering that was centuries old, a principle that had been largely forgotten in the age of computer modeling and perfect alloys. She was talking about sympathetic resonance and material dampening. She was, in her own simple words, teaching a master class. Harrison Thorne felt the last of his certainty crumble away, leaving only a raw, gaping sense of astonishment. He had built his empire on the belief that he was the smartest man in any room. He paid for the best minds, the best materials, the best technology. He had created a world around him that reflected his own image, hard, polished, and unforgiving. And now, a 10-year-old girl was telling him that the solution to his biggest problem wasn't more strength, but a little bit of softness. It was a lesson that went far beyond the mechanics of an engine. Fabricate the bushing, Harrison said, his voice quiet, but firm to her exact specifications. A copper sleeve, and find me a new bolt. He looked at his team, and I want every single one of you to watch, and I want you to learn. He then turned his full attention to Amelia. The woman was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a fierce burgeoning pride. She looked as if she were about to faint. Mrs. Hayes, Harrison said, his tone stripped of all its earlier mockery. Your daughter, she has a remarkable gift. Amelia could only nod, unable to speak. She pulled Chloe closer, her arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. I believe we had a deal. Harrison continued, the words feeling strange and heavy in his mouth. But the terms were that she had to fix the engine. The test is not complete. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. We will install the sleeve and the new bolt, and then we will run the engine one more time. If it runs for longer than 90 seconds, if it runs for even 91 seconds, then the money is yours. He looked at Chloe. And young lady, he said, his voice laced with a respect he hadn't shown to anyone in years. When this is over, you and I are going to have a long talk, because I have a feeling you have a lot more to teach us. The engineers rushed off to the machine shop, a sense of renewed, almost frantic purpose in their movements. They were no longer just following orders. They were part of something impossible, a scientific miracle guided by a child. As they waited, the atmosphere in the lab transformed. The cold sterility was replaced by a palpable sense of anticipation. Doctor Reed engaged Chloe in a quiet conversation, not as an adult speaking to a child, but as one scientist to another. She asked Chloe about her great-grandfather, about the old engines, about how she learned to listen to the metal. Chloe, no longer feeling the pressure of the test, answered with a simple, unaffected honesty. She told her about Grandpa Eli's hands, how they were rough but gentle, and how he always smelled of oil and coffee. She told her how he believed every machine had a soul. Amelia watched them, and for the first time in years, the crushing weight on her chest began to lift. It wasn't about the money anymore. Not really. It was about seeing her daughter not as a burden or a worry, but as a miracle. It was seeing the gift she had always known Chloe possessed being recognized by the world. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of her mind, but it was now overlaid with a powerful, soaring hope. Harrison Thorne stood apart from everyone, observing. He watched the little girl speak with the seasoned physicist. He watched his own mother, her face slowly regaining its color. He felt like a stranger in his own laboratory, a king in a kingdom that had been turned upside down. His entire life had been a relentless pursuit of control. He controlled his company, his employees, his public image, but in the space of an hour, a 10-year-old girl had taken all of that control away. She had operated on a level he couldn't comprehend, using a language he didn't speak. She had humbled him, and as he stood there watching this quiet, extraordinary child, he realized something that shocked him to his core. He wasn't angry. He was grateful. An hour later, Dr. Miles returned carrying a small velvet-lined box. Inside lay a newly machined bolt and a gleaming rose-gold copper sleeve. The parts were installed with the reverence of a sacred ritual. Every engineer in the lab gathered to watch. The new bolt was carefully placed into the copper-lined housing and tightened not to the maximum possible torque, but to a new lower specification that Chloe had suggested. When it was done, the lab fell silent once more. This was the final test. Everything, the money, the jobs, the future of the Apex project, came down to this moment. Dr. Miles stood at the control panel, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Harrison. Harrison looked at Chloe. Chloe gave a small, confident nod. "Begin the test," Harrison Thorne said, his voice echoing in the cathedral of science. Dr. Miles pressed the button. The Prometheus engine roared to life. The roar of the Prometheus engine was a familiar sound, but the feeling in the room was entirely new. There was no longer a sense of dread, no countdown to failure. Instead, there was a fragile collective hope, a sense of witnessing the impossible. Every person in the laboratory stood frozen, their eyes glued to the large digital timer on the wall, its red numbers marking the passage of time. 10 seconds. The engine's hum was smooth, a perfect, powerful purr. Chloe stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, listening not with her ears, but with her whole body. She could feel the engine's heartbeat, and for the first time, it was calm. The frantic, hidden shiver was gone. The copper sleeve was doing its job, absorbing the dissonant vibration, comforting the tired metal. 30 seconds. The engineers stared at their monitors. The data streams were flawless. Every metric was green. The vibrational sensors, now calibrated to listen for the whisper, showed a clean, stable, harmonic. It was the performance they had dreamed of, the one their simulations had promised but reality had always denied. 60 seconds. Harrison Thorne found he was holding his breath. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. He had gambled fortunes on the stock market, on corporate takeovers, on the rise and fall of global economies. He had made and lost millions in the span of a single day without flinching. But he had never felt a pressure like this. His entire worldview was balanced on the ticking of that clock. 80 seconds. This was the critical point. The moment the cascade resonance had always begun its deadly symphony. A hush fell over the room. Dr. Miles gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white. The whine, the shudder, the death rattle of the engine. They were all expecting it. 85 seconds. The engine did not whine. It did not shudder. It sang. Its powerful, steady roar was the sound of a healthy heart, beating strong and true. 89 seconds. 90 seconds. The timer clicked over. 130. A collective gasp went through the room. They had passed the mark. The curse was broken. 131132. Someone in the back of the room let out a choked sob of relief. Doctor. Miles looked up from his monitor, his eyes wide with disbelief. All systems are stable, he announced, his voice cracking with emotion. Resonance is holding at 98% efficiency. It's perfect. The timer kept climbing. 2 minutes, 3-5. After 10 minutes of flawless continuous operation, Harrison Thorne finally found his voice. Shut it down, he said, his voice. Doctor. Miles complied. The engine spun down with a gentle controlled hum, its roar fading into a contented silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet clicking of the cooling metal. Then the room erupted. The engineers burst into applause, cheering and clapping. They hugged each other, some with tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down their faces. 6 weeks of hell were over. The impossible problem had been solved, but they weren't just celebrating the engine. They were applauding the little girl who had, in the space of an afternoon, taught them more than their years of education. Amelia Hayes finally let go of the breath she had been holding. She sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight being lifted off her soul. She looked at her daughter, who was now being tentatively approached by Dr. Miles and the other engineers, their faces filled with awe. They were looking at her, not as a child, but as a savior. Harrison Thorne walked slowly through the celebrating crowd, his eyes never leaving Chloe. He stopped in front of her. The engineers quieted down, sensing the gravity of the moment. Harrison knelt, bringing himself down to the little girl's eye level. The proud, arrogant billionaire was gone. In his place was a man humbled to his very core. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a wonder he had never known. "You actually did it." Chloe simply nodded, a small, shy smile finally gracing her lips. "It wasn't sad anymore," she said quietly. "It just needed someone to listen." Harrison looked from Chloe to her mother. He stood up and faced Amelia. He took a deep breath. The public declaration feeling both surreal and absolutely necessary. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his voice clear and steady, projecting to every corner of the lab. "Earlier today, I made a promise, a contract, in front of witnesses." He gestured to the stunned faces around him, and then to Dr. Reed, who was watching with a small, satisfied smile. "I offered $100 million to anyone who could fix this engine. Your daughter has not only fixed it, she has reinvented our entire diagnostic process. The contract is valid. The money is yours." Amelia's head shot up. She stared at him, her mind unable to process the number. $100 million. It was an amount so vast it was meaningless. It was a joke. It couldn't be real. "Sir, you can't be serious," she stammered. "It was a game. You were angry. We don't expect." "I have never been more serious in my life," Harrison interrupted, his voice firm. "I do not make offers I don't intend to honor. My word is my bond. It is the foundation upon which I built this company." He looked around at his employees. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. A promise made is a debt that must be paid, no matter how foolish the promise may seem at the time." He turned back to Amelia. "My personal banker will be in touch with you tomorrow to arrange the transfer. I suggest you hire a very good lawyer and a very good accountant. You are going to need them." Amelia started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. It wasn't the joy of winning a lottery. It was the sudden, earth-shattering release of a lifetime of fear. The medical bills that haunted her waking moments and tormented her sleep. The constant gnawing anxiety of not knowing how she would afford the next treatment, the next prescription, the next doctor's visit. The terror of leaving her daughter alone in the world. In an instant, all of that was gone, wiped away. It was more than money. It was freedom. It was life. Chloe, seeing her mother cry, wrapped her small arms around her waist. "It's okay, Mommy," she whispered. "Now you can get better." That simple, heartfelt phrase struck Harrison Thorne with the force of a physical blow. He had been so caught up in the engine, the contract, the sheer drama of the event that he hadn't truly considered the human element. He had used this woman's poverty and powerlessness as a prop in his theater of humiliation. He'd made a joke about her simple problems, her mortgage, her car payments. But he now saw the truth in her tear-streaked face. Her problems were not simple. They were the profound, terrifying problems of a mother fighting for her life and for the future of her child. A wave of shame, deep and unfamiliar, washed over him. He had seen the world in terms of profits and losses, of assets and liabilities. He had never truly seen the people who cleaned his floors and served his coffee. They were like Amelia had been part of the furniture. "Your medical treatments," Harrison said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "You're your debt." Amelia looked up, surprised that he would know or care. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice thick with tears. "It's been difficult." Harrison felt a sudden urgent need to do more, to fix more than just the engine. The $0 was a contractual obligation, a payment for a service rendered. But what he felt now was a moral obligation, a need for redemption. "Dr. Reed," he said, turning to the physicist, "you are a government official. I need you to bear witness to this as well." He turned back to Amelia. "The $100 million is for your daughter's genius. That is a separate matter. As for your medical care, Mrs. Hayes, consider it taken care of. From this moment on, you are under the full and complete coverage of the Thorne Industries Executive Health Plan. The best doctors, the best treatments anywhere in the world. All of it will be paid for. And your existing debt, consider it gone. I will personally see to it that every bill is settled by the end of the week." Amelia's sobs grew louder, but they were no longer sounds of despair. They were sounds of a miracle. She looked at this powerful, intimidating man, and for the first time, she did not see a monster. She saw a man who was trying in his own awkward way to be good. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of her entire struggle. "Thank you." Harrison merely nodded, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. He had spent his life acquiring things, companies, buildings, wealth, power, but he had never before felt the profound satisfaction of giving something away. Later that evening, after the chaos had subsided and the engineers had finally gone home to get their first real sleep in weeks, Harrison Thorne sat in his vast silent office on the top floor. He had asked Amelia and Chloe to wait. He wanted to understand. He sat across from them, not behind his massive mahogany desk, but in a simple chair. He had taken off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. He looked for the first time not like a titan of industry, but like a man. "Chloe," he began gently, "your mother told Dr. Reed that your great-grandfather taught you about engines." She said his name was Eli Vance. Chloe nodded, her eyes bright. "Grandpa Eli was the best. He could fix anything." Harrison leaned forward, a strange look on his face. "Sergeant Elias Vance from the 8th Air Force. The 100th Bomb Group." Chloe's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, you knew him." Harrison leaned back in his chair, a slow, sad smile touching his lips. He looked out the window at the glittering city lights, but his mind was miles and years away in a dusty, forgotten corner of his memory. "No," he said softly. "I never had the honor of meeting him, but my grandfather did." He turned his gaze back to Chloe. "My grandfather was a pilot, Captain Robert Thorne. He flew a B-17 called the Iron Maiden. On his 24th mission over Germany, his plane was hit by flak. 2 of his engines were out, and the third was on fire. He was losing altitude, preparing to give the order to bail out over enemy territory. He paused, the old family story feeling fresh and raw in the telling. But his crew chief, a young sergeant, refused to give up. He crawled out onto the wing of the plane in the middle of a battle with nothing but a small toolbox and a fire extinguisher. He put out the fire and he somehow managed to get one of the dead engines running again. He saved the plane and every man on board. Harrison looked directly at Chloe, his eyes filled with a new, profound understanding. My grandfather owed his life to that man. He recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but it was denied. The paperwork got lost in the chaos of the war. After they got back to England, my grandfather tried to find him to thank him, but the sergeant had already been reassigned. My grandfather searched for him for years after the war, but he never found him. He said it was the greatest regret of his life. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final stunning piece of the puzzle. That crew chief's name was Elias Vance. Amelia and Chloe stared, the revelation so immense it felt like a fairy tale. The history connecting their families, a tale of heroism and regret, had been a silent, unknown presence in the room the entire time. Chloe, with a child's directness, was the first to speak. "So, your grandpa was the pilot?" she asked. "Grandpa Eli told me about the pilot. He said he was the bravest man he ever knew for keeping the plane steady while he was on the wing." A lump formed in Harrison's throat. His grandfather had always told the story the other way around, painting the crew chief as the sole hero. Two brave men, each seeing the heroism only in the other, their stories finally meeting in this room. "My grandfather looked for him his whole life," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "He always said that none of this." He gestured to the city lights outside would exist without Elias Vance. He wanted to give him his share of the company. Amelia thought of her grandfather's humble life, his quiet dignity, and his hands that could fix anything. He had never known that a fortune and a legacy of gratitude had been waiting for him. "He passed away last year," she said softly. "He never spoke much about the war. He just said he was a mechanic." Harrison stood and walked to the window, feeling the weight of 2 generations on his shoulders. The $0 now felt like a pittance, a down payment on a debt beyond measure. "It seems I have 2 debts to pay," he said, turning back. "One to the daughter for her genius, and one to the great-granddaughter for the life of my grandfather." He looked at Chloe, the ruthless businessman gone, replaced by something more human. "Your great-grandfather saved my family, Chloe, and today you saved mine. This company, my reputation. You fixed more than just an engine. You reminded me of something I had forgotten: gratitude, honor." He walked to his desk and took out a silver-framed photograph of a B-17 crew. He pointed to a young captain. "That's my grandfather, Robert Thorne." Then he pointed to a quiet man with kind, steady eyes. "I never knew who this was. I think this must be him." Amelia touched the glass, tears welling as she saw the image of her grandfather, young and strong. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my grandpa." The circle was now complete. 6 months later, the Thorne Industries' innovation lab had been transformed. The cold, sterile cathedral of science was now a vibrant, collaborative workspace. The new culture was built not on fear, but on curiosity. Failure was now treated as an essential step toward discovery. Amelia Hayes, healthy and radiant, walked the floor not as a cleaner, but as a director. Harrison had created the Elias Vance Division of Intuitive Diagnostics, a department dedicated to finding and nurturing unconventional genius. Amelia was its head, and her first act was to establish a scholarship foundation for gifted students from underprivileged backgrounds, ensuring other hidden talents would get their chance. Chloe was the lab's heart. After school, she would consult on the engineers' most stubborn problems, teaching them to listen to the machines. The $100 million was in a trust, but her greatest treasure was the work itself. She had a playground of the world's most advanced engines and a room full of brilliant people who finally spoke her language. Harrison Thorne was a changed man. He still ran his empire with a brilliant mind, but now he led with a compassionate heart. He had learned the most important lesson of his life from a 10-year-old girl. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest, and true strength is found in the humility to listen. One afternoon, Harrison found Chloe sitting by the perfected Prometheus engine, which hummed with clean, limitless energy. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, sitting beside her. Chloe kept her eyes on the machine. "It's happy now," she said with a contented smile. "It's doing what it was born to do." Harrison looked from the engine to the girl. He thought of the pilot and the mechanic, their bond of courage echoing through the generations to be fulfilled in this room. The story was never about a broken engine or a fantastic bet. It was about broken connections being mended. It was about a historical debt paid in the most unexpected way. Harrison Thorne finally felt like he had fixed something within himself, something far more important than a 2 billion machine. He admitted his own tired, broken heart. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening, maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories. So feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below.